Hello there and welcome to Redstone Academy. This is Redstone 110, Redstone Comparators. The comparator is simultaneously one of the simplest and one of the most complex redstone components there is. But to understand it on any level, I highly recommend you install the resource pack that I recommended in Redstone 101 that allows you to see the redstone signal strength. Comparators rely so strongly on redstone signal strength that being able to visualize what the signal strength is coming out of any of these comparators just makes a huge difference. It helped me learn a lot about how comparators work, and I can't overstate how important it is and how valuable of a tool just being able to see the signal strength is. And you'll see that as we go along. So I'll put a link in the description to where you can follow those instructions if you haven't already, and I'll place a card up there right now that you can jump to and go follow those instructions if you haven't already. I highly recommend it. So this is what a comparator looks like in your inventory and on the ground. And you can see it's got a very similar theme to the redstone repeater, but they are distinctly different blocks. But they both have these like little miniature torches on them, and they both are directional blocks. So you can see back here we've got two little mini torches here. This is the back of the comparator, and where we've got this one tiny little torch, or just the end of a torch, this is the front of the comparator. Just like this is the front of the repeater and this is the back, they are both pointing in that direction. Comparators have the same placement restrictions as redstone repeaters do, and you can look at the world download if you want to see all the specifics. By the way, in Bedrock Edition, you can set up repeaters and comparators on top of walls and fences, but you cannot do this in Java Edition. The most basic function of the comparator, and the one that most people are probably already somewhat familiar with, is the ability to look at the contents of a container and output a signal strength based on how full that container is. And we can do that with a number of containers, chest and double chest, including the trapped varieties, droppers, dispensers, hoppers, barrels, chest minecarts, and hopper minecarts. These need to be on a detector rail in order for that to work. And then we can also do it on shulker boxes, furnaces, blast furnaces, smokers, and brewing stands. And like I said, the signal strength is based on how full the item is. So generally speaking, if it's only got one item in it, it's going to output a signal strength of 1. So anytime it has any item in it, it will output a signal strength of 1. If it's half full, generally speaking, it will output a signal strength of 8. So this one is also half full. I just powered it. It's still, oh, now it's less than half full. It's at 7. We put one more item in there. Now it's at 8. And if it's all the way full, it's going to output a signal strength of 15. And it will output a variety of signal strengths in between there. This one is 3. It's generally based on the percentage. So whatever percentage it is full, there's a whole Wikipedia chart, and I'll link that in the description if you want to look at the specifics of what signal strength will output what. But you can see we're getting a whole bunch of different signal strengths. And then when we get into these ones right here, so these ones have, this one will hold 3 different stacks. So if it's only holding one stack, it doesn't matter what stack it's holding. It will output a signal strength of 5, this specific one. If it's got 2 stacks that are in there, this isn't smelting because it won't smelt redstone, but you can actually place it in there. You see a signal strength of 10. And if it's all the way full, doesn't matter which stacks you're placing it in. So if you had output items, that same thing, it doesn't really differentiate at all. And the same thing over here for the brewing stand. The blaze powder does count, and the awkward potions or any potions or water bottles will count. They're unstackable items, so they will count as a full stack. And then a full stack of nether wart means that this one is considered completely full. There are a few other non-comparator items that will output a comparator signal as well. So the cake, by default, will output a signal strength of 14, and as you eat it down, that signal strength will slowly go down by 2s. The cauldron will compare the number of water bottles that are in it. So if you put a bucket of water, that will output a signal strength of 3. But if you do it by water bottles, I place 1 water bottle in here, signal strength of 1, 2, and then completely full is a signal strength of 3. And then the composter will place it, it will do a signal strength from 0 to 8. So if there's nothing in it, it will do a signal strength of 0. And this I've done it once and twice. So for every melon I put in there, it's based on how full it is, like so. And then the command block is kind of out of the side of the scope of what we're going to do here, but it will do it based on how many times the last command was successful. So it killed some zombies with this one. It killed 4, but it still was only successful 1 time. Most of the time, it'll either be 1 or 0, but there are a few circumstances where it will output a stronger signal strength than that. Again, outside of the scope of what we're discussing here. The end portal frame will output a signal strength based on whether or not there's an I in it. So if there's not an I in it, it will output a signal strength of 0. If you put an I in it, it will output a signal strength of 15. Never used this before. The item frame needs to be on a block with the comparator on the other side of it. And then if you spin it, it will output a signal strength from 1 to 8, I believe. Yep, 8, based on how many times it has been spun. So 1, 8, and if there's not an item in it, it will output a signal strength of 0. And then the music box will output a signal strength based on which disc you put in it. So that one's 13, this one's 9, and if there's no disc in it, then it will be 0. And then the lectern will output a signal strength based on what page the book has been turned to. So if I turn it to page 2, this one has 4 pages. So it's based on a percentage again, just like a container. But one of the easiest ways to check is if full signal strength means that it's on the last page. So we can show you how you can actually check for full signal strength. And when we talk about comparators a little bit more, and then the Beehive or the regular version, the wooden version, will output a signal strength based on how much honey is inside of them. I believe this one is completely full, and that'll output a signal strength of 5. And the respawn anchor will output a signal strength based on the number of respawns that are still available to it. You can place a solid block between a container and a comparator, and it will still read the inventory of the container through the solid block, and it will still output the same signal strength as though the comparator were right next to the container. So you see here we got 1 item in here, we got a signal strength of 1. So there's no signal degradation through this block here. And this is pretty useful from time to time. Like one example is maybe you don't want to have to see the comparator. So you can place a wall here in between your chest and a comparator on the other side. And then if you put items in there, then you can still read the signal strength through it. This works with any of the containers as well as any of the non-container items that will output a comparator signal. But this obviously won't work if the solid block is a container itself. So a dropper is actually considered a solid block, but because it's a container, it's actually going to read the signal strength, the inventory of the container here, which has no items in it, and not of the chest on the other side. There's no reason to be fancy like this. Just use regular solid blocks like this. But it's worth mentioning that all of these containers and these non-containers here are all considered solid blocks, and this won't work if you try this. And it's also worth mentioning that in Java Edition, if you power the solid block to a signal strength of 15, then the comparator output will always be a signal strength of 15, no matter what items are in the chest. So this is not full. This would not output a signal strength of 15. And if I depower this, then we get the proper signal strength of 3. But if it's powered like this, we get a signal strength of 15. In Bedrock Edition, this actually isn't true, so I'm powering this solid block right here to a signal strength of 15, but we have no output over here because there's no items in the chest. If I put an item in the chest, now we have a signal strength of 1. It's a very weak signal, and you can see that. So it's only reading the signal strength of the chest, and it's ignoring the power that's coming into the block itself. But if I remove this chest, we're actually going to get the output of a signal strength of 15. And we'll talk in a little bit about why that happens. But with the chest there, it will ignore that strength. And even in Java Edition, this only works with signal strengths that are specifically of 15. So we got a light-weighted pressure plate, which will output a signal strength based on the number of items that are on top of it. So if I placed a few stacks of items on it, we're still getting a signal strength of 4 here. And even if we tried a few extra stacks of items to get a signal strength that's greater than 4, it's still only going to say 4 unless we actually took it all the way up to a signal strength of 15. That's the only time that it works. Like any other Redstone component that's capable of producing power, the comparator will strongly power any solid block that it's pointing in towards. So it is directional, so it won't power a block on the side of it or anything like that, but whatever it's pointing into, it will strongly power. So it will power Redstone components as well as Redstone dust. but we haven't really dealt with one that doesn't output a signal strength of 15 all the time. And you can see here the redstone dust on the other side actually has a signal strength of 5, which would be the same redstone signal strength as though we placed it right there. So signal strength is not degraded by placing it through a block like this. We're still getting a signal strength of 5. And again, if we put redstone dust on top, it's going to power this one to 5, but it's also going to power this side to 5 as well. So it doesn't matter that there's redstone dust on top. That doesn't weaken the signal at all. But as we go on further, the signal strength will start to weaken on the redstone dust itself. And something I didn't mention when we talked about repeaters was that this is a fairly useful scenario that I use all the time, where you point the comparator into a solid block and then take the redstone signal out from underneath the block. And I use this kind of all the time. It's very, very useful. And again, you can do this with repeaters as well, where you're pointing it into a solid block and then take the signal out from underneath it. It's just a useful way to direct your redstone wire where it's not going to get in the way of something else. All right, so let's talk about some of the more complex functionality of the comparator. The comparator will actually accept an input from the sides. So we've got a redstone signal. Its signal strength is 10 going into the side right here. And whenever there's a signal strength coming into the side, it will compare that signal strength against the signal strength of whatever is on the back. So only if this signal strength from the back is at least as strong as either of the two sides will it output the signal strength coming from the back. So if I put one item in here, normally if we didn't have the signal coming from the side, we get a signal strength of 1. But I've got this, and that makes it so it doesn't output a signal strength because it's looking for it to be at least 10. So I could add a few more stacks. We're still not going to get a signal strength. And then I could go up to like a half a chest here. Still no signal strength. It's only until I actually get it up to a signal strength of 10. And now it's actually outputting the signal strength of 10, which is the same as if we didn't have redstone coming in from the side. And if I went a little bit further, we'd actually get an even stronger signal strength. But it will only output that signal strength if it's stronger than what's coming in from the side. Although you can power the back of a comparator from a solid block or from an adjacent redstone power component, you cannot power the side of a comparator from either of those two things. So this right here, we've got a signal strength of 14, and either of these two should be creating a signal strength of 15 that would go into the side, but we're still getting a signal strength of 14 out here, which means this isn't actually working. Neither of these devices right here are powering the side of the comparator. So since most redstone power components either attach to the side of a block or the top of a block, most of them can't actually point into the side of a comparator. That leaves us with the only really 4 options for pointing into the side of a comparator. You could use a redstone block. You can see signal strength 14 is getting blocked off by the signal strength of 15. You could use a repeater. So we're powering the repeater, signal strength of 15. It's blocking off the signal. We're not getting an output here. You could use another comparator. So this one is a full chest, so we've got a signal strength of 15. So it's not, that's powering it into the side, so we're not getting an output here. Or redstone dust, as we saw before. This one has a signal strength of 15, so we can see that we're not getting a signal strength over here. Any one of these setups, by the way, is a perfectly valid way to make sure that a container is completely full, just by putting a signal strength of 15 into the side of the comparator. That requires that the signal strength coming from the back be at least 15. So if I put this almost all the way full, this is still a signal strength of 14. I could even just drop one item, and then we're one item short. This is still a signal strength of 14. If I put that one last item in, we've got a signal strength of 15. So we've got an output signal telling us that this chest is completely full. And that would work with any one of these 4. These 2 are probably the most common with the repeater or just redstone dust. Probably the repeater because it's less likely to interfere with other things, but redstone dust would work as well. If you wanted to check a container for different levels of fullness other than completely full, that's when containers that hold fewer items might come in handy. So a furnace, for example, only holds 3 stacks of items, so you don't have to put as many items in it to make it half full, for example. So this one is half full. We're outputting a signal strength of 8, which, by the way, that's a great way to check it. just put redstone dust out the end, and you can see that that's a signal strength of 8. And I've done that by just having 1.5 stacks. And you can see I've actually used a non-stackable item. That counts as a full stack. And then I've used an item that only stacks to 16, and a half a stack of that is 8. So by using only these 9 items, then I'm actually getting a signal strength of 8 out of that, because this furnace is half full. And then this chest the comparator will only register a signal if the chest is at least half full. And we can go and put that in there. Now we're getting a signal strength of 8 out the side. And you can power both sides of the comparator. So this one is a signal strength of 10, and this one is a signal strength of 5. So it will actually read the strongest of the two signals. So as if I just put redstone dust in between these, you can see it's going to look for a signal strength of 10. That's basically what it's going to do. It's just going to take whatever the strongest is. So we would have to fill this 2/3 of the way full, just like the furnace. And now we're getting a signal strength of 10. But if we only filled it 1/3 of the way, then we're not going to get a signal strength, because this 10 is blocking it out. And if you just wanted to check and see if a container had any items in it at all, then you could put a furnace with just one item in it with the comparator pointing into the side. But that's kind of redundant, because you could just have a repeater right after the comparator, and that would shrink the signal. So even though it's only a signal of 1, you still get a nice strong signal on the other side. Or you could just use the signal right away, because if you don't use the signal right away, it will decay. And you could use a solid block to prevent the decay for another block, but then it would decay 1 block further past that. So either use the signal right away or use a comparator repeater. I think it's important to add that a comparator, as long as this light is off, then the comparator is always in compare mode. It's just that it's comparing it against a signal strength of 0, but that is still technically compare mode. I also think it's important to add that you don't always have to use a signal coming from a side to check for a signal strength. So anybody who's dabbled with redstone even a little bit might recognize this right here as a sorter. And what this is doing is it's looking at this hopper here, and it's saying that's got a signal strength of 2, and the signal is carrying down here. Now, if it goes a full 3 blocks, so if I put an extra item in here, now it's at 46 items, now we have a signal strength of 3. But it will travel 3 blocks, and then I've got a repeater right here that's checking for the signal on this block right here. So only if it's at least 3 strength. So if we remove the item, now the repeater is off because it's only at a 2 strength. So very clever system. Technically, it's the same thing as doing this right here, where we've got a signal strength of 3 coming in from the side, and then we're comparing against it. But this is a 1 wide. It's a very clever system. So don't pin yourself into a box thinking it has to be one way. There might be another way of doing the same thing. Comparators have another mode as well, and that's called subtract mode. And I can enter subtract mode by right-clicking on it, and that will turn this light on right here. If I right-click it again, that will put it back in compare mode. And so we've already seen this situation here where we've got a chest or a furnace here, and this is outputting a signal strength of 8. And then I've got a half full chest right here. So this is also outputting a signal strength of 8. So we've got a signal over here. This is a signal strength of 8. But if I put it in subtract mode, we get a signal strength of 0. And why is that? It's because instead of comparing it, it is subtracting. So 8 minus 8 is 0. And if it's less than 0, so if we remove some items, we're still going to get a signal strength of 0. But if I add some items in, so we make this a signal strength of 10, so we can see signal strength of 10, but if you're subtracting 8 from the side, now we have a signal strength of 2. Now, this doesn't come up a whole lot. This is mostly useful when you're trying to craft a very specific signal strength for some reason or another. And it comes up mostly when you get into really advanced circuits, but it does come up from time to time, and it's useful to remember that it exists. And it's also worth pointing out that if you power it from both sides, so again, we have a signal strength of 10 and a signal strength of 5, it's only going to use the strongest of the two. It's not going to add these together and say you need a full signal strength of 15 and then this would never be powered because 15 minus 15 is 0. You can see here we've got a signal strength of 11 that's coming in from the side, so we're getting a power of 1 from the output. And if I made this completely full, we get a signal strength of 5 because 15 minus 10 is 5. There's one other function of the comparator that we've seen happen a few times and I haven't really talked about, and that is if there is a redstone signal coming into the back of a comparator, it will output a signal of the same strength. So this is kind of like how a repeater will repeat a signal, but a repeater will always strengthen the signal to 15. The comparator will leave the signal strength alone. So we can output it into a solid block and we'll get 13 on the other side. Or we can output it into redstone and we'll get 13 right there. And you can chain them, so we've got 14 here and 14 on the other side. Just like a repeater or most other redstone components, there's a 1 redstone tick delay or 1/10 of a second. Unlike a repeater though, you can't extend that. It's always going to be 1/10 of a second. And you can take the signal out of a solid block as well. So this one is being powered with a signal strength of 14. We get 14 on the other side. And you can technically do this where we've got a signal strength of 15 and 15 on the other side. Although anytime where it's always going to be a signal strength of 15, a repeater's cheaper, so why would you use a comparator there? And then you can use any of the functionality of the comparator in conjunction with this. So we've got a signal strength of 15 here, and we're comparing it against a signal strength of 14, and that will allow it to pass through. But if we switch it into subtract mode, we've now got 15 minus 14, a signal strength of 1. So I really hope that I've helped demystify the redstone comparator. As you can see, it's actually a pretty simple block, but there's a lot that it can do, and that adds some complexity. And I think that makes it harder for people to wrap their minds around all the things that it can do. But if you break it down into the individual pieces, and especially if you use the texture pack to see the signal strengths and see how it messes with things and how that all works together, I think that helps a great deal. So I hope you learned a lot. I had a lot of fun making this, and I hope to see you again for the next Redstone Academy. Thanks for watching. Bye now.